Today we'll be talking about dungeons, specifically solo dungeon crawling. Dungeons are a staple of RPGs and for good reason as well. They offer a structure to the gameplay, usually filled with perilous enemies and traps and treasure to be found. And especially for the OSR crowd or the old school crowd, they're definitely a staple. Today we'll be talking about it in the context of solo roleplaying. As for generators, I've tried a lot of options, and I've realized that there are certain qualities that are, for me at least, indispensable for a solo dungeon generator to have. So let's clear this drawing away. Okay, there we go. So number 1, it has to be procedural. What do I mean by procedural? It has to be made room by room. If possible, it should reveal as little as possible about the future rooms that you are about to progress through to keep that element of surprise there. Number 2, there has to be no prep involved, or at least very little prep. This one is a personal thing for me. I do enjoy prep work for some of my solo sessions, but usually not quite that much. And I find that prep work for a dungeon can tend to make it lose some of its mystery as well, and make it a bit of a drag. And speaking of drag, the third thing is it needs to be quick. Making the dungeon room by room should be quick. Dungeons that take a lot of time to build can tend to slow down the process and suck all of the fun out of the experience, at least for me. Again, this is just my personal criteria. Before we go into my picks, I should probably also mention that these picks are restricted in the following ways. Number 1, they will be system neutral. This means that these systems will not include solitary defilement or rune cairns, dungeon delving rules, although those are really excellent. However, all of the stuff that I'm showing today can be mixed and matched with those systems with relative ease. Number 2, these are going to be analog. I might do a video on digital options in the future, but the benefit of having a video of analog systems is that even if you do digital, you're still able to replicate most of it out. And finally, they will be fantasy focused. This kind of works out for me because I'm a big fan of dark fantasy, but a lot of these things can be adapted for sci-fi if you do need it for that. Links to all of these systems that I'm going to cover will be in the description below. So, let's get into it. Okay, so first up, an absolute classic, Scarlet Heroes by Kevin Crawford. If you're in the solo RPG scene, it's very likely that you've heard of this already. It's basically a way to play your OSR RPGs completely solo, and it's great for that. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about dungeon adventures. So, making a dungeon is real simple. You start with a type and size, and you get a bunch of inhabitants. You can have multiple inhabitants within a dungeon. This is a part that I really like, dungeon threat adjustment. For the most part, if you roll on it, you'll get the danger is roughly as anticipated, the threat is equal to the PC's level. Okay, but it could be much worse than you expected in here. The threat is equal to the PC's level plus 1d4 plus 2. Or it could be they'll send for help. Your first expedition is at a threat level equal to the PC's level. Any further expeditions are at threat plus 1d4. So what is this threat system? This threat system is a way of determining generally how hard the dungeon is going to be. It's how hard the traps and the enemies are going to scale to. And I think that's really useful. It gives you a general idea about whether you're striking above your pay grade. There might be something really valuable in this dungeon that you might want. Are you willing to risk the additional difficulty? There's some gaminess there, and I really like it. I actually took this system for my supplement for Mark Borg, which is Solitary Depths, and I had a threat system in that as well. The other thing that I really like about this, so as you can see, you can roll for locations within the dungeon, as most dungeon generators allow you to do, but you can also roll for content in a very interesting way. A lot of the time, when you're rolling for content within the dungeon, it can be quite random, right? But here it makes a little bit more sense. For example, you're rolling for an encounter. If you roll an 8 to 10 on a d10, you get an encounter. But if you get an encounter, it's more likely for you to find some treasure being guarded. If there is a treasure but there's no enemy, no encounter, it's more likely for there to be a trap. And if there's no trap, there's no enemy, there's no treasure, it's gonna be a bit more likely for there to be a feature. And that basically gives the dungeon a little bit of verisimilitude. It allows you to kind of have a more designed dungeon in that sense. The other thing I do like as well is the encounters. So when you're fighting monsters or enemies or whatever within the dungeon, they have stats, and these are basically for any OSR system. So I did say that this list was going to be system neutral, but OSR games cover a wide spectrum. So if you're playing basically any OSR game, you can use this as kind of a base for the stats that you can assign these creatures. And even if you're not playing an OSR game, you can just replace these stats with your own, and basically you won't have to guess for what kind of stats the enemies have. It takes the guesswork out of it. It's very useful in that regard. There's also some other stuff here. There's combat quirks, and there's ways to venture within dungeons with goals. So if you're more than halfway through a dungeon, you're more likely to find that goal. Dungeons with alarms. So if you're raiding a guarded area, for example, this is good for that. Overall, who would I recommend this for? If you're playing an OSR game, or you want an old school kind of dungeon crawling experience, wherein the mechanics kind of dictate the narrative instead of the other way around, this will probably be for you. In my experience, it makes very interesting and fun dungeon crawls, especially when I'm using it with OSR systems and with using the Scarlet Heroes rule set. And yeah, I think it's just great for that in general. Okay, we have kind of a double whammy here. We have the campaign notebook by Perplexing Ruins, and we have the solo gaming sheet, specifically the dungeon one, also by Perplexing Ruins. So, what do I like about this? Well, let's open up the campaign notebook here, and as you can see, there's a bunch of geomorphs. So when you go into a room, you don't have to think about what the room is like. You just have to roll 2d8, and you get 4 and 2. There's going to be this. So you enter a room, there's a door on the other side, and then you can just roll the dungeon die here, and you're gonna get an 8, and that's gonna be a hostile encounter, and you can even roll on the hostile encounter here and figure out, okay, what kind of hostile encounter is it? It's a low kind of creature, so it's some kind of easily dealt with creature. But you could have also gotten a trap or a hazard or something else, and you can roll on those as well. So like for example, if you got a trap instead, what kind of trap is it? You can just get a poison trap, and that's super useful. This makes it super fast to generate out a dungeon, and you just have to roll the dungeon die on each room. You can supplement it with tables, but what's nice about this campaign notebook here is that in addition to having these pages already there for you to draw your dungeon, at the very back there's even more tables specifically for dungeon encounters here, and for a bunch of other stuff, features, descriptions, details, names. You got stuff for looting the body, and it's just great for having an all-in-one kind of system that you can just take out, use your rule set of choice, and you basically can start dungeon crawling. Now, he also released this amazing sheet, which is just crazy to me how he was able to pack so much in here. It's basically the same as the campaign notebook, except this is actually free on itch.io. The campaign notebook is like, I think it's about $5. It's really cheap, and I'll highly recommend both of these products. But this one is completely free. It uses a d6 and it's as easy to kind of interpret as a campaign notebook. So we roll the explore die and we get 2. So we get some kind of omen. So in this room we find some kind of omen. What kind of omen is it? We find some kind of knocking sound. So it becomes really interesting right off the bat. Let's do another one, and we're gonna roll for that. We're gonna get 5, some kind of danger. We're gonna roll for a danger here, and that's going to be a hazard of some kind. Hazard, we're gonna roll on the hazard, and we're gonna get 4 resources. So our torches basically go down a notch or something like that. It's really easy to just take this one sheet that is, by the way, double-sided. There are a bunch of bosses, there's a bunch of denizens here, there's a bunch of encounters, and some tables for looting the corpse. It's great. Take this one sheet, take your system of choice, and you can have a dungeon adventure ready to go within seconds. You know what's even better though? Find something like this. This is just a simple binder sheet. So I can put this in there, and now I can literally start drawing on it, and it's reusable. So let's start with an entrance. There's going to be a 4, so we can literally start drawing out our dungeon, and we can go through and say, okay, there's a door there, and we can go through and say, okay, we enter the dungeon, what do we find at the start? 6, there's some kind of danger awaiting us at the entrance of the dungeon. What kind of danger is it? 2 is some kind of trap, so then we can roll on the trap table here, and it's gonna be some kind of fumes. Some kind of fumes are maybe emanating from this section here, and we have to kind of like get in through this door. And you can see, is the door locked? You can roll on that. And 3 is unlocked, so we're able to go in through here, and we're able to just keep going. Like, it goes really fast. 2 and 5, so that's going to be a corridor, and it's going to be an intersection of some kind. And at this point, we can just keep rolling the explore die, and it can just keep going on like that. It's really, really good because it is super easy to take this, take additional supplements, and just mix and match everything. If you don't have the generators that you need on here, you can supplement it, or vice versa. It's very, very easy. And one more thing, this is extremely portable as well, which might not seem like a huge benefit, but it is a huge benefit. Having too many things around you can kind of increase the friction of doing solo role-playing. And I find that as I play more and more, having these kind of tools that are easy to kind of use and reuse becomes very important to me. And of course, you could just use the geomorphs here and the tables, and you could draw up your own really nice dungeon, and it's still just going to be one page. This is really genius, and I've tested it out, and it works. I've tested it out with certain systems like Runecairn, I've tested it out with Morkborg, and it's just great for all of that. They all have their own dungeon delving rules, but this allows you to kind of supplement it in a very easy way. This is extremely compatible with pretty much anything out there. And as I said again, this is like $5. This is free. The links again will be in the description, but yeah, this comes highly recommended. Especially if you're a beginning player and want to get into it without too much of a cost barrier, perfect. So next up is something pretty interesting actually, Ironsworn Delve. And Ironsworn Delve is the dungeon crawl system for Ironsworn, which if you're a solo role player, you've definitely heard of that. It's probably the most popular solo role-playing option out there. But this is great for just narrative dungeon crawls in general. You can print out the delve rules on like one sheet of paper, and you can get these done at a print shop, or you can buy the actual cards, up to you. But let's say you're exploring, let's say it's a hallowed, some kind of church, let's go with a hallowed sea cave, like a sunken church or something. It's kind of interesting. And that's where Ironsworn Delve shines. You can basically have certain combinations and just make a dungeon that is suited towards your theme. So there's 2 ways of doing this as far as I'm concerned. You can basically use the delve moves. If you do that, and I won't get into it too much, I would recommend giving yourself a +2 for edge, shadow, and wits, because that's the average for Ironsworn stats, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But edge is basically for if you're going fast, shadow is for if you're moving slowly, and wits is for the in-between. And you can basically use that to track your progress through the dungeon, and that's nice and all, but the real star of the show, I think, are the cards. So this is how it works. You place the cards like this. So the theme is on the top and the domain is on the bottom. So if you can see here, it's actually going to give you a D100 table of things that can happen, or rather features that are there. If you then take the card and move it like that, you now have a D100 table of dangers that you can find within that place. So all of the events are going to be structured and designed around whatever kind of place you're going through, which is very, very, very useful, especially if you're into more narrative dungeon crawls. So like I said, I won't go through the delve moves specifically. You can use those if you want, which I have. It works really well, even with systems you'd think it wouldn't work at all with. I've used this with Morkborg of all things. The real star of the show is this. So we can just roll on that and see what we get. and we're going to get 50, which is going to be an eroded chamber. That makes sense. It's some kind of underwater church. Is going to have an eroded chamber of some kind, and you can always add some of the theme from here into the stuff in here. It kind of fits together quite well. And let's roll again. You get 94. That's going to be something unusual or unexpected. So there are going to be some general events here as well, but for the most part you're going to actually be finding things that are specific to your theme, which is very nice. What about dangers? So let's roll on that. And what kind of danger do we get? So we're going to get a 24. Unexpected leader is revealed, and that makes sense for a church kind of thing. But we can always theme it to be like, okay, this leader is the leader of an underwater cult. Maybe they are fish-like, or maybe they're like squid-like, like Cthulhu. What I'm trying to say is, even if you're using some kind of other dungeon generation system, like the two ones I just mentioned, if you are looking for some kind of feature or some kind of danger that is going to be consistent with your narrative, Ironsworn Delve cards are really, really good for that. Again, the system for delving itself works just fine, but really, the standout is definitely going to be the cards. They're relatively cheap, and like I said, you can print them yourself. I got these printed at a print shop and then I cut them out myself. But yeah, that's gonna be a bit of extra work or money, so that's something to think about. But these come highly, highly, highly recommended. So last but not least, we have Axebane's Deck of Many Dungeons. This is something I recently received in the mail, so I haven't really used it all that much in a lot of my dungeons, but in the ones that I have used it, it worked really well. So this is just gonna be a bunch of cards that you can get from GameCrafter. Took a while to arrive since I'm from Singapore, but once you get them, you can basically divide it into your jokers, which is gonna be some generators as well as instructions, the aces as well as the kings. So I'm just gonna go through how they expect you to use this deck. Firstly, just gonna shuffle the aces, and you're going to lay one down, and that is going to be your entrance. Simple enough. And then as you go through the dungeon, you start adding to it using cards from here. So I'm just going to go through this door here, and that's going to lead to a dead end. But as you can see, there's already some narrative stuff here. So there's a magic pool here, and I have to emphasize that this is mostly for 5e, I think, but you don't need to use the effects directly as stated. You can roll up your own effects, like you can use the generators that I talked about previously, like from Perplexing Ruins or something else, and you can, mix and match. And that's how I would recommend using this particular dungeon deck, mixing and matching a lot. I feel like this is suitable for a lot of different systems, but one thing I noticed is that I tend to find myself in fairly small dungeons as a result of the cards. As you can see, the dungeon floor is done. There is a side entrance here, and normally when you finish off the dungeon, you will then replace one of the rooms with the king. I will normally just replace this with the king, and that will be basically my goal. The quest goal are stairs down to the next level. So that makes a very, very short dungeon, but sometimes that's good. I would recommend this deck if you were trying to look for something that is quite evocative. There's, as you can see, treasure here, there's skeletons, there's locks, there's two magic pools actually. There's a lot of stuff, there's like encounters and stuff like that, and you can just use your system's tables for that. But if you're just looking for a short dungeon crawl and you don't want to put in too much effort, this is really, really good. Again, I do think that this is best used when you're actually using it with your system and being specific to your system. This will give you just really box standard fantasy stuff, and I'm fine with that, but sometimes I want my magic pool to do more than restore D8 HP. So what I will do is I will just, if I was playing Morkborg for instance, I will just roll up a scroll and see what that magic pool does to me in terms of the magical effect of the scroll. Something like that, Like if I was getting a trap or I was getting treasure, I will roll up using my system's kind of tables. Especially for something as short as this, don't be afraid to replace, essentially, some of the stuff that's already here. So now that we've covered those 4 things, where does that leave us? I think what I want to draw your attention to is that these things are all modular. You can combine Scarlet Heroes with Axebane's deck, you can combine the campaign notebook with Ironsworn Delve. The idea is, for solo role-playing, you want to be able to make the game that you want to play. So don't be afraid to hack, modify, iterate, combine. There is one more technique that I didn't talk about, which is cyclic dungeon generation. This is an article by Sasa Victory that I printed out, and it is not meant for solo role-playing, but I found it easy to adapt for solo role-playing. It might look a bit intimidating, but it results in dungeons that are very interestingly designed, and it actually uses modern or slightly modern procedural generation techniques. For those of you who don't know, I'm also a video game developer, so I'm really excited to see those kind of things at play. But this is something that I won't cover in this video specifically, because I think this is complex enough that it does need a video on its own. So, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you know all the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. Particularly comment if you can help it. I do enjoy hearing from you guys, hearing about if I helped you guys out in your experiences. Some of the most fulfilling moments making these videos for me is when people have told me that it has personally helped them, and I would like to continue that. I'm making these videos because I want to introduce people to how fulfilling, how fun solo role-playing can be. Also, let me know if there's any particular topics that you want me to cover. Solo role-playing can be quite a vast world, and I'm hoping I can make videos that can help you along your path. So again, thanks for watching, and bye for now.